Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Theo, and today we're going to be creating an advanced planet shader inside of Blender. Now, a few weeks back, I actually released a video about creating a planet shader inside of Blender, but since then, I found a little bit more of advanced techniques that give us more control over the atmosphere and the surface detail of the planet. So I thought I'd share that updated knowledge with y'all. Another thing is, I'm going to be using textures from our latest pack, Exoplanets. However, you can do this procedurally or use your own planet textures. All of the same techniques and steps will still apply. Let's get started. So, since none of us have actually seen a planet or a life, or I'm assuming most of y'all haven't, I think it's going to be good to start with some references. And I have some references from some movies I like and some actual photos as well. And we'll kind of be playing around with some different ideas in these images. So first off, this is from Ad Astra. I love this movie, and what I really liked about this is it showed the details of the clouds and also the fall off of the atmosphere. So that's something we're going to pay attention to. When making a planet, there's really only three layers. It's the surface, clouds, and atmosphere layer. So as long as we can pull reference from all three of those layers, we can create something pretty realistic. So you can see in these two, you can see this gradient fall off from like this deep black or deep blue, I guess, and then to this like baby / lighter blue. Very, very, very beautiful images, not only in like their realism, but also like their artistic direction. You have this green mixing with this blue. They're playing really complementary off of each other. And then you have this orange right here. Just a very, very overall nice image. It's framed up in the third. You got a subject right here in the third. So I really thought that these two images were nice and could potentially inspire a little bit of our planet creation, especially this gradient in the atmosphere. So here we have some more reference images. These are from the Alien prequel series. And what I wanted to kind of show you here is like how much the clouds are displaced and how dramatic and pretty and nice it looks. Like this cloud is catching highlights, and then we're catching shadows here, and it's giving a lot of value and depth to the image. Now, we won't be able to create something on this level of detail inside of Blender, but it is something I'm potentially looking into doing inside of Houdini and Clarice. So while it's not achievable inside Blender, it could potentially be in other programs. And these two shots are just really nice. I just like the light fall off here as well, and then the way that the clouds kind of like go up into the upper atmosphere is really nice and very, very dramatic. This is not something you would expect on Earth, like if you see our Earth reference right here. They are lowered down in this image, but still you can see how it like flattens off real quick. So if you're going from like a more alien type planet vibe, it could potentially be something you look into. And then this is a real photo from NASA. And this, you can see here, again, it's not as displaced as this, even though we are probably a bit higher up. But there is quite a bit of displacement, and there's even like this interesting smoothing effect after the clouds reach a certain height level. They kind of smooth off. And then there's even this another layer. I would call this like a new cloud layer, and it's a much smoother and much wispier. So this is something we can consider as well. Also, you see that gradient fall off right there as well. Now, these two images are from The Mandalorian, and I like a lot about them. I feel like this could probably have been filled in a little bit more, and the only other issue I have with them is that the stars are pretty bright. You would see, like, in our actual image, you can't really see the stars. However, this is an artistic decision, and it can give context to your planet as well, so it could be something that you're potentially interested in doing. We will be adding stars, but not to this bright. And part of the reason I think they did this was because the very first Star Wars had this kind of look with their planets, so they're trying to stick with the visual continuity and style. And these last two images are kind of just examples of what we're kind of not looking to do. So first off, there's no like sense of lighting. Like we do have a light source right here, but other than this light source being here, it looks like it's lit from this side. It looks like it's lit from this side. There's not a lot of diffuse information. There's definitely no bump or specular information. So this is something we're not really looking to do. And same thing with this planet. It's a little bit more realistic, but the background to me is just way overdone. And also like this fall off into the shadow is very, very long. And there's really no like depth over here. It gets pretty low in value, but not as low as some of these other images get, especially this one right here. So will we achieve this level of detail over here in these next 15 minutes? No, but we should get something pretty close on par with The Mandalorian, which is pretty good considering we're about to do it in the next 15 minutes inside of a free open source program. So let's get started. So let's just start by setting up the scene. We're going to delete that default cube and punch Shift A. We'll add in a UV sphere, and then we'll go to our UV sphere and let's just add some segments and some rings to it to give it a lot of detail. I've gotten comments before saying, why don't you just shade smooth? You could shade smooth, that's totally valid. However, if you're too low in polygons, you'll still get these jagged lines on the edge of your sphere, and it's not going to be completely smooth and round. So I always just like to play it safe and go for the subdivided UV sphere. So this will be our first layer right here, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one surface. And we'll copy that surface layer, and we'll name this next layer clouds. And then again, we'll copy our clouds layer and name it atmosphere. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a new collection and just place them all under this, and I'll call it planet. So now we have our surface, clouds, and atmosphere layer all contained within our planet collection. First thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and increase the radius of each layer because we want them to stack on top of each other. Looking back at our references, our surface layer isn't higher than our clouds layer, and our clouds don't extend out of the atmosphere. So we have a surface of 2 meters. We'll have our clouds layer be something around 2.05. These are always numbers we can change later on if we feel they're too small or too big. So we'll just scale that up a little bit. And we'll have our atmosphere layer be 2.1. So if we zoom in, you'll see we have a surface, clouds, and atmosphere layer, and we just want to make sure we're shading smooth on all of those layers. Next thing we're going to do is add in a light. So I'm going to go to lights, area light, and we'll just bring that light over and up. Now I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit, and instead of manually rotating this, I'm just going to add a constraint to it. So go add object constraints, track 2. And then I'll track to, let's say, our surface layer. I'll go ahead and scale that light up a little bit. We'll render on our viewport, and then we're going to switch over to cycles. So now that we have our lighting set up, let's deal with this HDRI. We're going to make this pure black. We'll go over to our world settings right here, and then we'll switch from our node editors from object to world, and we'll just bring our background all the way to black. Now, the higher you take this up, the more your shadows are going to be filled in. So if you do want to fill in your shadows in a quick and dirty way, you could just bring up your HDRI. However, I want to get that full range of value, so I'm going to go ahead and take that all the way down to 0. So far, the scene's looking pretty great, and believe it or not, we're almost finished with our geometry. I'm just going to delete this other light we have up here out of the scene, and I'm going to position our area light just shading half the planet. Let's go ahead and take up those settings. We'll do something like 250. And this might seem a little too bright, but at first, but you'll see once we add a volume and an atmosphere and some clouds, it's going to really start absorbing and scattering that light. So now let's position our camera. And I don't want to manually reposition the rotation of this camera every time I decide to move it. So I'm going to cheat with it again. I'm going to go to add object constraints, and I'm going to do a track 2. And this time I'm going to create a null. So we'll just create an empty plane axis. I'm going to bring it into our collection. Then on our camera tag, I'll click track 2 and just select this empty. Let's go ahead and bring that camera, zoom in a little bit and bring it down some. And I'm just going to get even with this x-axis, zoom out a bit. And then reposition the light just a little bit so we can get it set up for texturing. And that's looking pretty good. Now it's time to start texturing. We'll turn off our atmosphere and clouds layer, and we'll start with our surface layer. We'll switch to object mode again, click new material, and we'll call it surface. So this is where you can get creative with your surface. This is going to be the most important layer, and if you're going to be creating your textures from scratch, I highly recommend you create it with using complementary colors, and especially keep in mind your atmosphere scattering as well. I'm going to be using some textures from our latest pack, exoplanets. These are handmade, and I like to use them in all of my projects because they have that level of detail and realism that I'm looking for. However, you don't have to go ahead and buy these textures if you want. There's some free textures online, or you can make your own in Photoshop as well. However, if you want some really simple drag and drop pre-made assets, these will be a great choice. So I'm choosing to go with our planet called Origin from the pack, and that's because we have a lot of these complementary teal and orange colors within it, and I think that's going to scatter really nice with a lighter blue atmosphere. Along with that, we'll be getting our cloud map, normal, and roughness layer to add in all of the extra specular and bump detail that we need. And inside the pack, we have a pre-rendered image of the planet, and we can kind of get an idea of what it could potentially look like, especially mapped onto a sphere. So that looks pretty nice, and I think we'll be going with this surface for this particular project. So for now, I'm just going to start off with our color and roughness channel right here, and potentially, if we want to, we can add a bump later on. So first thing we'll do is we'll start by mapping it. If with the Node Wrangler add-on, just punch Control-T. Make sure we're mapping from object to vector, and we're doing a sphere projection as well. Let's go ahead and plug that into our base color. So you can see right off the bat, we're already getting that diffuse level of detail that we're looking for. But the problem is our specular level has no detail. It's completely specularly smooth. So that's something we're gonna wanna fix, and we'll fix that with our roughness layer. And I'm gonna go ahead and also add in a gradient because I like to remap my roughnesses usually depending on my lighting and scene. So we'll add in the color ramp, and we'll plug our color into the factor. And I'm just going to take this mapping that we had before and plug that into our roughness as well. So we'll take our color ramp, map that right into the roughness like that. Using the Node Wrangler add-on, I'm going to punch Control, Shift, and left click, and we can see our roughness right there. Make sure we're mapping spherical, and there's our roughness. I'm going to go ahead and create some more contrast with this roughness and see if we can get a little bit more detail out of it. So by using the gradient, we can remap how smooth or how rough this planet is going to appear. I encourage you to look at references and kind of just go off what you're feeling artistically as well. Black will give you completely smooth results, and white will give you completely rough results. That's looking pretty nice right there. Next thing I'm going to do is add in another color ramp, and then I'm going to map this into a bump node. We'll take our color, map it into factor, and then take our color from here and then map it into height. Then we'll map our bump node into our normal, and you can see that brought in a bunch of detail, but that's obviously way too much. So what we'll do is we'll just take our strength down, something like 0.1, and maybe even our distance down to something like 0.5. And I'm just gonna lower our distance a little bit more and bring our strength back a little bit as well. This is really gonna be to taste and how dramatic and stressed you want the surface of your planet to look. So believe it or not, it's that simple to create your realistic planet surface. Now it's time to move on to our cloud layer. And then I'm going to be dropping in our clouds that match this particular planet, so this map right here. So under our cloud layers, we'll drop in this cloud image texture, and then using the principal BSDF, we're going to map our color into alpha. Then we'll punch Control-T on our clouds, make sure we're spherically mapping them, and we'll use the generated texture coordinates. So if you look back at our references, you'll notice that the clouds were displaced, and these are not displaced. These are flat and boring. So what we'll do is we'll add in a displacement node. We'll punch Shift A and search displacement. We'll map in our displacement and go to material settings. And under the settings of material, make sure you're doing displacement only. You'll see our clouds have disappeared, but all we need to do to fix that is bring our mid-level down to 0. So a clever way we can displace the clouds is by using the original color of our cloud's texture. So where it's brighter, it's going to displace higher, and where it's black, it's not going to displace as much. That's going to give us a realistic displacement based off the cloud's alpha or opacity. Let's go ahead and drop in a color ramp, and also a map range, and also a math node, and we're going to change this from add to map range, and also a map range node. And I'll explain in a little bit why we're going to use this map range node, but for now, I just want to plug the color into our ramp and our ramp into our height. So you'll see it displaces really, really high right off the bat. What we'll do is we'll take our scale down to something like 0.005, and I'm going to go ahead and clamp up the black values just a bit. And on top of that, I think I'll go to our cloud object. So looking at our wireframe, it looks like we're not getting enough detail from our displacement, and that's partially because our geometry is not meshed high enough. So I'm going to go to the modifiers on our clouds layer and add a subdivision surface modifier. We'll do something like 3 and 3 levels and apply it. Now you can see our clouds layer is way more meshed, and we should be getting a lot more displacement detail. Let's go and turn back on our render view. So it's looking good so far, and we're getting a little bit of displacement detail, but I want to get a little bit more. So what we'll do is we'll add a map range in, and we'll make sure our color is routing into our value and it's routing out into the height. And we'll take our initial range from 0 to 1 to 0 to 10. Now this is going to allow us to displace a little bit more and not clip the upper levels of our displacement. So we'll go back from something like 0.005, and we can start playing with some different numerical values. So something like 0.4 is obviously way too high. I think we'll go back down. We'll do something like 0.2. And it's looking pretty nice, but something that I'm still noticing, especially if I zoom in, is this displacement is still a little low resolution. You can kind of see where it's poking up and down. So we'll just add some more subdivisions with another subdivision surface modifier. This is where you want to be careful because we're subdividing by quite a bit now. We don't want to crash our system. So I think I'll just do 2 levels of viewport, and that gives us more than enough detail that we need, especially from this far out. So something that I'm noticing by zooming out is it looks like our displacement, now that we've added all that detail, is pretty high up. So maybe we go back down from our scale of 0.2 to something like 0.1, and we might even drop it further down. And another thing is our clouds are way too high off our surface layer. So we'll go to our clouds geometric properties, and we'll go from something like 2.05 to 2.01. So that's looking a lot better. It might be a little too high off right there. You can kind of see them sticking out a bit. But for now, we'll leave it, and we may come back to it later or not. This is going to all depend on the scale of your scene as well. Let's go and turn on the atmosphere layer and start scattering some interesting complementary colors into it. We'll create a new material, and we'll delete our principal BSDF, and we'll bring in a principal volume. We'll plug our volume into volume, and now you can see we have some scattering going on in the atmosphere. However, this is not what we're going for. This is not even close to our references. We're not getting those gradient fall-offs that we're looking for. So the first thing we're going to want to do to achieve that gradient fall-off is we're actually going to want to use some geometry information and map that into a color ramp and map our density based off that color ramp. So let's get that set up. And for this particular part of the shading, I'm going to go ahead and move the camera in a bunch and take our null that we created earlier and drag it up some. This is because I want to pay extra close attention to this fall off right here. So let's go ahead and bring in a geometry node, and then we'll take a vector transform. We'll route our position into the vector using world and object space. Now we want to separate all of the different XYZ values from this vector. So we'll search separate, and then we'll click separate XYZ. We'll plug the vector into those coordinates. Using a math node, we're going to multiply our coordinates together. So we'll switch from add to multiply, plug in our X value into both, copy that over, and we'll make 2 copies of it. And we'll do the same for our Y and Z value. Now we need to add these multiply values. So another math node, and we'll take our first 2 values, add them together, duplicate that math node, and take that addition with our final value right here. Now we're ready to remap using a color ramp. So I'm going to punch Shift A, and I'm bringing a color ramp. We'll map that into our factor right there. And we're going to want to multiply this by a constant using a math node. That way we can control the density. So take the color and map it into value 1. And value 2, something like 5, will be a good starting point. Let's go ahead and route that into density. So now you can see our density has drastically changed, but we're going to want a little bit more control over it. So we'll add another handle by pressing add, and we're going to make this black. We'll take this all the way up to the top and switch it with this white one right here. And you can see now we're getting this nice gradient fall off versus before it was a harsh line. So depending on where this is, you can kind of control how far your atmosphere is scattering out. Make adjustments until you kind of get to a comfortable spot, and now it's time to start scattering in some color. So we'll copy this color ramp we created, and then we'll take the same add value, map it into factor, and map our color into color. Now we're just scattering black and white, so let's go ahead and delete these handles. From looking at the surface, I think a bluer color will be nice to scatter in. That's looking pretty good right there. I'll add another handle and maybe scatter a different shade of blue as well. I'm just going to make sure both values are at 100%. That way this color is not affecting and kind of fighting with our density. So it looks pretty good right there. Let's back out a little bit and see how it looks. We'll bring our empty back down to the center. And so far, not too bad. However, I think this atmosphere is a little too big, especially looking at our Mandalorian reference right here. There's not too much. This is mostly, looks like to me, mostly glow effect. It looks like the atmosphere is very, very snugly hugging the planet. So that's something that we'll want to do as well. Luckily, we could change this two ways by bringing our density down, but I don't really want to mess with it because I kind of like the fall off that we have going. So I think what we'll do is we'll just change the scale of the sphere. We're at 2.1. Let's try something like 2.05. Okay, that's pretty nice, but it looks like we took it a little too far low, so we'll do something like 2.07 and cut the difference. That's not looking too bad. I think I will go back to our surface layer, and for our roughness, we'll bring down some more white values because it's feeling a little too smooth to believably be a terrain. So just by clamping that value a little bit, now we're getting a much better roughness fall off, and it feels like there's like an ocean right here butting up against this land, and that's exactly what we're going for. I'm pretty happy with our bump. It could possibly be taken down a bit, but I think it's pretty good for now. Let's go ahead and add in a little bit of stars. We'll take a plane, and what we're going to want to do with this plane again is add a constraint and cheat a little bit. So we'll go to add object constraint, track to, and I want to track to the camera. So if we move this plane back, it's going to serve as a perfect backplate. We'll go ahead and scale up our plane. We're going to scale it in the Y direction a little bit more than the Z direction, and that's because we're going to be bringing in a 2x1 texture. Let's go ahead and add a new material to the plane, and we'll call it stars. And I'm going to delete our principal material and add in a mission material. We'll plug our mission into surface, and hopefully your plane is filling up the full window of your render. This is just a good way you can check real quick. So I'm going to drop our star map into the mission texture. You can see in the background it's way too bright, and there's an example in the very beginning that we went over, which is exactly what we don't want to do. So what I'm going to do, add in a color ramp and map that into the factor and map our color into strength. And then I'm just going to bring down, you can see it's already helping out a lot. I'm going to bring down these brights just a little bit. That way, we have some stars in the background giving the image depth and giving our planet context, but it's not too much to where it's super ridiculous and fake looking. Now I'm getting to a spot where I'm pretty happy. Real quick though, I did want to explain a little bit about why I'm using an area light and maybe not a sunlight or any other light. So the reason I like to use the area light is if I scale it down, I can sharpen up this termination line, and you can see it right there. As our light gets smaller, our shadows get harsher, and you can see that reflected in the image. And as our light gets bigger, the more it wraps around and the more it smoothens off our image. So this is really just a personal preference. What are you going for artistically? I'm going to go somewhere in between. Something like that's pretty good. And then I'm going to go to our step render rate under our volume and change it to something like 0.1 and 0.1. This is just insurance that we're getting enough detail out of this atmosphere. So it's looking pretty good. I think we can take our atmosphere to something like 2.06 just because it looks like it's a little too high off the planet still. That looks great. Once you get your lighting and camera where you want it to be, you can go ahead and render it out, and we'll be doing our last bit of touching up inside the compositing context. So now that our image is finished rendering, let's go to the compositing context and let's click use nodes. I'm going to do a viewer output on this so we can see what our composite will look like, our final composite. And the first thing I want to do is bring in a glare and add a mix and a lens distortion. So we're going to take our glare, we're going to map our image into our glare, and then we'll take our mix node and we'll map our image one into the top, and then our actual rendered out image into that mix node as well. And then from that mix node, we're going to go to a lens distortion. We'll plug our image in right there. And then from our lens distortion, I'm going to add some curves. And then this will be our final output. We'll change our mix to screen, and then our glare, we're going to change from streaks to fog glow, mix all the way up to 1, and let's solo it and see what we're outputting. So right now, our glare is not catching anything. Let's go ahead and bring that threshold down a bit. And now we're catching this side right here. So what I want to do is maybe bring up the size of that glare just a little bit. And then that's then going to be feeding into our screen. So this glow is now overlapping on top. And it's kind of giving this faux kind of like atmospheric glow effect that we're looking for. And if you notice, a lot of our references has that as well. Then we'll go to our lens distortion. We'll click projection, distortion, maybe something like 0.1. And dispersion, maybe something like 0.3. Play around with these numbers. This is what's going to give you your chromatic aberration. So if you want a little bit of chromatic aberration, it'll play nicely, especially with the atmosphere. It kind of gives it a little bit extra of a glow or hit on the layer. And then I'm going to bring down some of our blacks a little bit and bring up the whites as well, just creating more contrast within the image, making it very punchy and very dramatic. I'm also going to switch it to film-like as well. Once you line up all your compositing nodes and you're happy, that concludes the lesson. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something new or some sort of new technique inside of Blender. Always remember, you can check out our newest pack, Exoplanets, if you're interested in some high-quality handmade planet textures. They're made by artists for artists like you. Thank you guys for watching, and have a great day.